I buried my brother 15 years ago, and I've been wearing his name like a stolen coat ever since. Fooling his wife, raising his children as my own, and building an empire on a lie that's about to come crashing down. Some sins are too heavy for the earth to hold, and mine have been pressing down on this dry soil for 15 years now, making the ground beneath my boots feel like it might crack open and swallow me whole. The name on the deed to this ranch, carved into the gatepost at the end of the long drive where the cottonwoods cast their shadows like prison bars across the dust. That name isn't mine, though I've been answering to it so long, I sometimes forget the sound of my own. Ezekiel Whitmore, they call me in town, tip their hats to me with respect earned through another man's sweat and vision. But the real Ezekiel has been feeding the prairie grass for a decade and a half, his bones scattered somewhere out there, in the vastness where the wind never stops singing its mournful song. I stand here on the porch of this house he built with his own hands, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon like a wound that won't heal. And I feel the weight of every sunrise I've stolen from him pressing against my chest like a stone. The cattle move slow and peaceful across the pasture, their lowing carrying on the evening air like prayers I'm not worthy to hear. And I know that tomorrow the hands will look to me for direction, call me boss, never knowing they're taking orders from a ghost who wears a dead man's name like an ill-fitting coat. 15 years I've been the shadow of Ezekiel Whitmore, and the shadow has grown so long and dark that sometimes I can't remember where it ends and the real darkness begins. The whiskey in my glass catches the last light of day, amber like the prairie grass in autumn, and I take a sip that burns all the way down to the place where guilt lives, that hollow space beneath my ribs where my brother's voice still echoes on quiet nights. He had a way of speaking that made even the hardest truths sound like music, could talk a wild horse into trusting him or convince a stubborn banker to extend credit with nothing but the strength of his handshake and the honesty that lived in his dark eyes like lantern light in a window. Those same eyes stare back at me now from the mirror above the mantelpiece, the one concession to vanity in this sparse room where function trumped beauty in every corner, except for the small carved figurine of a horse that sits on the windowsill, whittled by Ezekiel's patient hands during the long winter nights when the snow piled high against the door, and the fire was the only thing standing between us and the endless cold. The first time someone called me by his name, 3 days after I buried him out by the lightning-struck oak where he used to sit and watch the storms roll in across the plains, I should have corrected them, should have told them that Ezekiel Whitmore was in the ground and that I was just his no-account younger brother who'd never amounted to much more than a hired gun with fast hands and a conscience that moved too slow to keep up. Instead, I let the words wash over me like rain on parched earth. Felt something shift inside my chest when the banker nodded at me with the same respect he'd always shown my brother. And by the time I realized what was happening, the lie had taken root so deep that pulling it out would have torn up everything good that had grown from it. Coralie finds me there as the darkness settles over the land, like a blanket pulled up to the chin of a sleeping child. Her footsteps soft on the wooden boards as she approaches, with that careful grace she's carried since the day she became my brother's wife, though she's been mine in all but truth for more years than either of us likes to count. Her hair catches the light from the oil lamp she carries, brown as rich earth with threads of premature silver that speak to sorrows she's never given voice to. And when she looks at me, there's a question in her green eyes that she's been asking without words for longer than either of us can bear. She knows, has always known on some level that lives deeper than conscious thought, that the man who came back from burying Ezekiel wasn't quite the same man who'd ridden out that morning with a shovel across his saddle and grief carved into his face like scripture. The children are asking for their father, she says, and her voice carries the weight of 15 years of careful pretense, of bedtime stories told in a voice that learned to match my brother's cadence, of lullabies hummed in a key that still doesn't feel quite right on my tongue. Our children, though the blood that runs in their veins came from Ezekiel's union with the prairie school teacher who died bringing his second child into the world, leaving him a widower with an infant daughter and a heart that never quite learned to beat the same way again. I became their father not through birth, but through daily choice, through scraped knees kissed and nightmares soothed and countless small moments that add up to something that feels like love, even when it's built on a foundation of deception. Little Beatrice has my brother's eyes but my stubborn chin, though she'll never know it. An 8-year-old Jasper moves through the world with the careful consideration that marks him as Ezekiel's son, even as he carries gestures and expressions that are purely his own creation. They call me Papa with voices that hold no doubt, no hesitation, and every time the word falls from their lips, it lands in my chest like a blessing and a curse wrapped up together in a package I can't bring myself to unwrap for fear of what I might find inside. Tell them I'll be in shortly, I say, and Coralie nods, but she doesn't move away, instead setting the lamp down on the small table where my brother used to leave his hat at the end of each day. A ritual I've maintained not out of habit, but out of some superstitious fear that breaking it might somehow undo the careful illusion I've spent 15 years building. The light flickers and dances, casting shadows that seem to move with a life of their own, and for a moment I swear I can see Ezekiel's face in the wavering glow. Not accusatory, but sad, infinitely sad, like a man watching his life being lived by someone else. Gideon, she says, and the sound of my real name on her lips hits me like a physical blow, drives the air from my lungs and makes my hands shake in a way that has nothing to do with the whiskey or the cooling night air. It's the first time she's spoken my name aloud in more than a decade, and it hangs in the space between us like a bridge I'm afraid to cross, afraid of what waits on the other side of that admission. We've existed in this strange liminal space for so long, neither quite truth nor quite lie, that hearing my actual name feels like stepping into sunlight after years in a cave, painful and disorienting, and somehow necessary all at once. How long have you known? I ask, though I'm not sure I want to hear the answer. Not sure I can bear to know how many years she's been living this charade with full knowledge of what it was. How many nights she's lain beside me, knowing I was not the man she married, but the one who'd taken his place like an understudy stepping into a role without learning the lines properly. The silence stretches between us, filled with the distant sound of cattle settling for the night and the whisper of wind through the grass. Sounds that have formed the soundtrack to this deception for longer than either of us wants to calculate. I think I knew the moment you came back from burying him, she says finally, her voice so quiet I have to lean forward to catch the words. Ezekiel had a way of holding his shoulders, a particular tilt to his head when he was thinking. And you moved differently, spoke differently, even grieved differently than he would have. But I was so tired, Gideon, so tired of being alone, of raising 2 children with a dead husband's shadow for company, that I let myself pretend it didn't matter. Let myself believe that one brother could stand in for another if he tried hard enough. The confession hits me like a punch to the gut, doubles me over with the weight of understanding that I've not been the only one living a lie all these years, that Coralie has been my partner in this deception even as she's been its victim. The realization changes something fundamental about the shape of our shared guilt, transforms it from a burden I've carried alone into something we've built together, stone by stone, day by day, until it became the very foundation of the life we've made on this land that should have belonged to a dead man. Why, I ask, and the word comes out rougher than I intended, scraped raw by emotions I've kept buried so long they feel foreign in my throat. Why didn't you send me away? Tell the truth. Let Ezekiel rest proper instead of living on through borrowed time and stolen identity. But even as I ask the question, I think I know the answer, can see it in the way her hands fold together like she's holding something precious and fragile, in the way her eyes drift toward the house where our children sleep in beds that belong to another man's vision of family. Because you love them, she says simply, and the truth of it settles over me like dust after a long ride, coating everything in a fine layer of understanding that I've been too afraid to acknowledge. Not because they were Ezekiel's children, but because they were children who needed a father, and you needed something to love that wasn't shadowed by gun smoke and death. I watched you with them those first months, saw how gentle your hands could be when they weren't reaching for a weapon, how your voice could carry lullabies instead of threats, and I thought maybe we could all save each other if we just pretended hard enough. The wind picks up, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain, and I close my eyes and let it wash over me like absolution I haven't earned, but desperately need. 15 years of living someone else's life, of building someone else's dreams on the foundation of someone else's reputation. And it turns out the person I thought I was deceiving has been my willing accomplice all along, has been choosing this deception every day with the same deliberate care I've been using to maintain it. What happens now? I ask, opening my eyes to find her watching me with an expression I can't quite read. Something that might be relief or sorrow or some complicated combination of both. The lamp flame wavers between us, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow that seem to mirror the uncertainty of our position. The precarious balance we've maintained for so long that it's become as natural as breathing, as automatic as the sunrise. Now we decide if 15 years of being the right man in the wrong name is worth more than whatever truth we might salvage from the wreckage, she says, and I hear in her voice the same weariness I feel in my bones, the exhaustion that comes from carrying a secret so heavy it's worn grooves in our souls. Those children in there, they know you as their father, love you as their father, and you've earned that title through every scraped knee you've bandaged, every nightmare you've chased away, every time you've put their needs before your own comfort. Does it matter what name is carved on their father's headstone if the man they call Papa is standing right here? I think about Jasper's laugh when I taught him to rope a steer, about the way Beatrice's face lights up when I come in from the range at the end of the day, about all the small moments that have accumulated into something that feels like family, even if it began as an elaborate performance. These children don't know they're loving a lie, don't know their real father is buried under the oak tree where the lightning came down like the finger of an angry God. And maybe that ignorance is a kind of mercy, a blessing I've accidentally bestowed by choosing deception over truth all those years ago. Ezekiel would have wanted them to be loved, I say. And even as the words leave my mouth, I know they're true. Know them with the certainty that comes from sharing blood and childhood and all the complicated bonds that tie brothers together, even beyond death. He would have wanted them to have a father who came home every night, who taught them right from wrong, who showed them how to be good people in a world that doesn't always reward goodness. Maybe it doesn't matter if that father happens to be his brother instead of him. Coralie reaches across the space between us and takes my hand, her fingers warm and calloused from years of ranch work, from building a life on this harsh and beautiful land that demands everything from those who would call it home. Her touch is both foreign and familiar, carrying the weight of 15 years of careful distance, of love acknowledged but never quite spoken, of a marriage that began as convenience and grew into something deeper than either of us expected. I loved him, she says, and I nod because I know this, have always known it, have seen the way she tends the flowers on his grave every Sunday after church, have watched her trace his name on the headstone with fingers that remember the shape of his face. But I love you too, Gideon. Love the man you've become in his name. Love the father you've chosen to be. Love the way you've grown into this life, like it was always meant to fit you. Maybe that makes me a terrible person, loving two brothers, living with the one while mourning the other. But I can't change how my heart works any more than you can change the past. The admission hangs in the air between us like a bridge finally completed after years of construction, and I feel something shift in my chest, some long-held tension finally releasing its grip on my lungs. For 15 years, I've been waiting for judgment, for condemnation, for someone to point a finger and declare me unworthy of the life I've built on borrowed identity. But instead, I find understanding, acceptance, maybe even a kind of love that sees the man I've become, rather than the deception that made him possible. The children, I say, because even in this moment of revelation, there are practical considerations, responsibilities that extend beyond our complicated feelings into the realm of daily life, of dinner served on time and lessons learned, and the thousand small tasks that make up the business of raising young people into decent adults. Do we tell them, or do we let them keep believing what they've always believed? That's not a decision we have to make tonight, Coralie says, squeezing my hand with a pressure that feels like reassurance, like solidarity, like the first honest touch we've shared in more than a decade. Maybe someday, when they're older, when they can understand that sometimes the best fathers are the ones who choose the role, rather than simply inherit it through blood. Or maybe we take this secret with us to our own graves and let them remember a father who loved them enough to come home every night, regardless of what name he answered to. I think about the weight of secrets, about the way they can crush a person or free them depending on how they're carried, and I realize that this particular secret has been my burden for so long that I'm not sure I know how to exist without it. It's become part of the architecture of my identity, the load-bearing wall that holds up everything I've built in Ezekiel's name, and removing it might bring down the entire structure of the life I've carefully constructed over 15 years of daily choices. But maybe that's not what's happening here. Maybe instead of demolition, this is renovation. The replacement of a foundation built on deception with one built on understanding, on mutual acceptance of the complicated truth that sometimes love requires us to become someone we never intended to be. Coralie has given me permission to be Gideon pretending to be Ezekiel, to acknowledge the performance while continuing to play the role, and perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that small admission of truth is sufficient to transform everything that came before, from lie into something more complex, more forgivable. The lamp flame flickers again, sending shadows dancing across the porch boards like spirits moving through a world they no longer quite belong to. And I think about my brother, about the man whose name I've worn like a coat that was always slightly too large, but grew more comfortable with each passing season. Would he forgive me for taking his place, for raising his children, for loving his wife, for building his dream into something larger than he ever imagined? Or would he see it as theft, as the ultimate violation of the bond that tied us together from birth until that day when I buried him under the tree where he used to watch these storms gather on the horizon? I choose to believe he would understand, would see the love that motivated the deception, would recognize that I became him not to steal his life, but to preserve it, to ensure that his children grew up with a father and his wife didn't have to face the world alone. Maybe that's just the story I tell myself to sleep at night, but it's the story I need to believe, the narrative that makes sense of 15 years of careful performance, of daily choices to be better than I was, to live up to a name that never belonged to me but somehow came to fit like it was always meant to be mine. I should go into them, I say finally, standing up from the chair where I've spent so many evenings watching the sun set over land that bears another man's name on the deed, but has been shaped by my hands, my decisions, my vision of what this place could become. The whiskey glass sits empty on the railing, reflecting the last light like a mirror that holds no truth, and I leave it there, as I have every night for 15 years. Another small ritual in the elaborate ceremony of being someone else. Coralie rises with me, picking up the lamp and casting our shadows long across the porch boards, and for a moment we stand there together in the growing darkness. Two people who have spent 15 years living carefully around the truth and have finally found the courage to acknowledge it without necessarily changing it. The silence between us is different now, not the careful quiet of shared deception, but the comfortable quiet of shared understanding, of two people who have seen each other's secrets and chosen to love what they found there. Gideon, she says again, and this time my name on her lips feels like coming home, like the end of a long journey through territory I never intended to explore. Thank you for staying, for becoming who they needed you to be, for choosing us over the easier path of walking away. Ezekiel gave us life, but you gave us a life worth living, and maybe that's worth more than any name carved in stone. I nod, not trusting my voice to carry the weight of everything I want to say, everything I've kept buried for 15 years of careful performance, and together we walk toward the house where our children wait for the man they call father, where the warm light spills from windows like promises kept and love lived daily regardless of the name it answers to. Behind us, the prairie stretches away into darkness, vast and unforgiving and beautiful, the same land that has witnessed both truth and deception, death and rebirth, the endless cycle of seasons that erases nothing but somehow makes everything bearable. Tomorrow the hands will call me boss. The townspeople will tip their hats to Ezekiel Whitmore, and I will continue the performance that has become so natural I can barely remember where it ends and my true self begins. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, I will kiss my children goodnight, knowing that the woman who stands beside me sees both the man I was and the man I've become, loves both the deception and the truth that motivated it. Understand that sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing to become someone worthy of the love being offered. The door closes behind us with a soft click that sounds like resolution, like the end of one story and the beginning of another. And I follow the light deeper into the house that bears my brother's name, but has been made home by my choices, my love, my daily decision to be the father these children need and the husband this woman deserves, regardless of what name history will remember or what truth lies buried under the lightning-struck oak where the storms gather and the wind never stops singing its ancient song of loss and redemption and the endless possibility of becoming someone new. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.